Okay, as you might imagine, that was an Indigenous voice that was speaking to you. And this supports the comment that Anne made about the importance of place. If there's anything that Indigenous people represent, it's their place in this world and their identity associated with place. We're going to talk about values and principles and morals and ethics. And we're representing Indigenous values because that's who we are. But throughout our travels and throughout our visits around the world, we have found that these values are shared with many, many non-Indigenous people, as you might imagine. And Susanna, when we first met you in Holland, I mean, we met quite a few like-minded people when we were talking about values and principles. So I must say that in certain communities, certain places, the values that I represent can be considered somewhat universal in nature, and I hope they become truly universal around the world to help address some of the issues that Anna has brought up. So we'll talk about values for a while, and then we'll turn it back to Anna, and then I will probably close out this session right at noontime here. I'm from the Ogallala Lakota tribal nation in the state of South Dakota, Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, South Dakota. This is my granddaughter, Shahela, when she was a little girl. This was at a powwow in Denver. And that was a few years ago. She has grown up a little bit, and she has her own friends now, as you can see. We have some of our famous leaders from historical times, people such as Sitting Bull and Red Cloud, and of course there are many more throughout all First Nations and Native American tribes. Indigenous people, the Americas, all green, all the way from Greenland down to the tip of South America, inhabited by Native Americans. And of course, I think you all know the story about what happened with invasion and colonization and displacement and genocide, and it goes without saying the many things that have happened to bring us to where we are today. Indigenous people in the Americas under many, many different circumstances. Here's the way things kind of shaped up in the United States, and the red marks represent the Indian reserves or reservations as they look today. You can see on the eastern seaboard, there are not very many red spots. They're just so tiny. They're there, but they're very small, because primarily that's the way invasion came, and was from the east to the west. My great-grandfather, Luther Standing Bear, was one of the generations that were first sent away to government boarding schools so that they could change the culture, change the language, change the people in one very short period of time, taking the very young people, and he was about 12 or 13 years old when he first went away to school. He could speak no English. He was given an English name of Luther, and he went on to become quite proficient in dealing with the Americans, the white Americans. And but he also became very eloquent. He wrote quite a bit, especially in his later life. And he said certain things that I believe are kind of foundational principles for our Lakota belief systems. And this is the way he described it. Wakantanka, our Creator, one God, the Great Spirit. Through Wakantanka came this great unifying life force. And you can read it yourself. He goes on to say that thus all things were kindred, brought together by the same mystery, by the same God, by the same Creator. And this forms the basis of our belief system, our values, and our principles. And in fact, our spirituality, and what you might even think of as our religion, with the Creator, God, Wakantanka. Great Spirit. And this is what Luther Standing Bear talked about, this unifying life force where all things are kindred. All things in this world. And that's the trees, the rocks, the water, the insects, the birds, all the animals, and of course, all of human life as part of this entire life force of the earth. And through that, prayer and reverence are expressed daily, constantly. And one of the ways that we express it is with an acknowledgement. And we make daily offerings to acknowledge the presence of our Creator. We use our sacred tobacco to make offerings back to the earth. We say, Creator, receive my offering. Tukashla, Levi Ashriayo. The tourism values that emerge from all of these are values that are universal to the Lakota and to many First Nations and Native American belief systems. That of kinship. Everything is kindred. Remember that statement from Luther Standing Bear? Kinship. When we express this value of kinship, we're talking about everything and everybody. And I mentioned the air and the water and the trees and everything else. This feeling of kinship. And when you are related to something or something, whether it's your family, your blood relatives, friends, you have this feeling of kinship toward them. And you share things. You give. You receive. You have this principle or this value of reciprocity. You're always giving. You're always receiving. The same way that we receive gifts from the Mother Earth every day. You know, the food, the water, the air. And we don't always think about those gifts. We don't always acknowledge them. Well, we do in our belief system. We acknowledge those gifts and we practice this thing called reciprocity. It's a long word, but what it means is giving back in return for what you take, what you receive as gifts. Reciprocity. Ecosystems, the way the scientists have defined ecosystems, there are reciprocal relationships in the natural world, many that we don't even understand. But we do know that Mother Earth practices reciprocity in itself every day, out there in the meadow, in the mountains, in the waters, in the air. There's reciprocal relationships among everything that's on this earth. The earth tries to be in balance, and it does that through these reciprocal relationships. You know, the honeybee takes the pollen from the plant. It also takes what it needs for food from the flower. In turn, it helps the flower reproduce itself. That's, in its simplest form, that's a reciprocal relationship. There are many of those in this world that we don't even understand because our scientists are just not good enough at looking at entire systems with the world view. So, reciprocity, that's so important because it also reflects another value that we hold, which is generosity. You give generously at every opportunity. You give with no expectation of receiving anything in return. And that's a very common principle among First Nations and Native American people. Respect. Respect for each other. Respect for the earth. If I respect you, very likely, and I show that respect, very likely you will return that respect. You will return that favor. And that's the way the world works. Part of reciprocity. And then love. You know, in the tourism industry, we don't necessarily talk about love. We talk about the industrial model of tourism, but how much love is there in that? I mean, it's a very sterile, value-free environment. And we've been to a lot of sessions over there in the KKL building over the past 3 days. We didn't hear much expressions of love, or did we hear any at all? I'm not sure we did. But we don't mind saying love because that's what we feel for this place, this Mother Earth. And we don't mind having empathy for the distress that we put Mother Earth to. So empathy is a part of it too. If your relative, your kin, has some illness or some difficulty, you feel that empathy, you tend to try to do something about it, don't you? You help, you support. Do we feel the same empathy? And do we try to return favors to the earth for the gifts that the earth has given us? And then there's this feeling of reverence. We pray with the earth. We don't pray to the earth as we would a god or anything like that, but we pray with the earth. We pray with the animals. So those are the values that we represent. And you know, we use places on this earth, the natural world, to pray with and to pray at. And so we have certain places that are sacred, and we've been displaced in the Americas so much that many of our sacred places have been lost. We no longer have access to them, or very limited access. We have great difficulty with them. And for us, one of our most sacred lands, our most holy lands, is the Black Hills and Bear Butte. You know, a place to go for special prayers. So when we talk about values, we also relate it to indigenous wisdom. Wisdom and knowledge, they're all related. It's knowledge about the earth. Indigenous people being so close to the earth inevitably will have close knowledge of the earth as well. And when the earth is in distress, usually it's the indigenous people who are in distress with the earth as well. Because indigenous people tend to be what I call the real sharp edge of environmental issues. Whether it's droughts or tsunamis or other kinds of disasters, you will generally find indigenous people who are suffering along with the earth. So the knowledge and the wisdom, because indigenous people are so well connected with the earth. And we express it in the way we pray by saying the words Mitakoyasin. We are all related. At the end of every prayer, we say those words. So here's some of the things about indigenous knowledge and wisdom that I think as people in the tourism business you might be aware of. And the fact that indigenous people embrace this thing called sacred ecology. Embrace the belief that the entire earth is this living organism, and there must be some kind of holistic balance. Look at the earth in a holistic way. The earth wants to maintain a balance. It needs us to help it maintain that balance. And we mentioned kinship and this abiding love for all things. So, just very quickly, I worked a lot with the Cherokees, and they have this concept called Diyutu, which is living the right path. And that's what the Cherokees try to do. They do their best to live as individuals who have freedom, but yet support their community, their tribe, and also their nation, their entire nation. Balance, harmony, and right living. They have this other concept called Tohi, which is all about relationships. Trying to maintain this balance, relationships with oneself, the family, the community, the place in the world, and also the relationship with our Creator, with God. So that's about indigenous belief, wisdom, and values. And the path to indigenous, to ecological balance, we might say, is to find ways of protecting indigenous rights, lands, and knowledge, and to study the sources of that wisdom, and adopting these environmental ethics that indigenous people have into some common attitudes that we have about protection and restoration of places, and incorporating these concepts of wisdom into conservation, environmental programs, the kinds of things that Sam Shikonga was talking about as well. So I'm going to pause right here and turn it back to Anna, and I hope that you have somewhat of the gist of values of indigenous people that we think can contribute to this new industrial model that we hope we can help with. Thank you.